Welcome to your favorite health program right here on Ebru TV. You are watching My Doctor Show, where we keep you posted on the common illnesses there are and how to avoid them. I am your host, Purity Museo. Now, according to the World Health Organization, more than 8 million people use open defecation. This is where people tend to go out to the fields and open places such as open water bodies to just defecate. Now, open defecation has been linked to poor sanitation, which causes some of the common diseases such as diarrhea diseases. And now today we want to have a look at some reasons for open defecation. We have two important experts, one from the Ministry of Health and the other from UNICEF. They will be telling us what options there are other than open defecation and how it could be avoided and how bad or where we are as a country in terms of people using open defecation and some of the diseases that we risk getting once we practice that. Welcome to the show. Once again, my name is Purity Museo. Feel free to talk to us. We welcome you to the show. Use the hashtag MyDoctor to speak to us on Twitter at Ebru TV Kenya and at Purity_Museo. You can use the number. Help us discuss in a little more details what open defecation is and where we are as a country. What are some of the hazards that come with open defecation? Joining me in studio, just next to me, is Dr. Andrew Trivet, who is a water and sanitation expert from UNICEF. Welcome to My Doctor Show.
Thank you. Yes,
and we have Kefa Umbacho, who is the Director for Public Health, Ministry of Health. Kefa, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, and maybe, Doc, let's begin with you. When you talk about open defecation, what exactly are we talking about?
Thank you so much for welcoming us to your studio. And open defecation is basically people answering their nature call openly and anywhere. So people are shitting in the open. That's what exactly it means.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll be getting details of that. But Andrew, you will just help us understand the statistics, where we are as a country, before we even have a look at some hazards, health hazards that come with open defecation. The people using open defecation right now in the country, are we seeing, where are we as a country, because everything now has been modernized? Should we assume that the numbers are reducing, or what would you say?
Yes.
Comparing to other African countries?
Yes, thank you. Let me start with the global situation and then we'll come down to Kenya.
Yeah.
Globally, open defecation is practiced by almost 900 million people around the world. So it is a widespread problem that needs to be addressed in the interests of public health. Now, when we look at the statistics for Kenya, we find that still today there are about 5.6 million Kenyans that have no toilet and practice open defecation. That's about 12% of the population in Kenya. Now, compared to some of our neighbouring countries, Kenya's doing better than Ethiopia, where about 27% of the population practices open defecation. But we're not doing as well as, say, Uganda, where just 6% of the population practices open defecation.
Yeah. And Kefa, are you from the Ministry of Health? When you talk about Kenya having about over 5 million people practicing open defecation, that's quite a large number. What would you say is the problem?
I think basically, as you're saying, that's a very big number. Yeah. And that number, when we look at it in the negative, that's a big risk threat for the health of the people. But basically, the biggest problem which contributes to the big number is in informal settlement areas, we have the land tenure, which is a problem that needs to be answered. And in the rural, we have issues of the level of education and understanding, the connection between disease and human waste, and the cultural issues and taboos. I think that by and large contributes heavily to why we are not being able to have 100% access and have 100% use. Now, in terms of how do we address the issues so that we can close the gap, we realize that as opposed to the years before when the practice was that let us provide hardware, now our focus is in trying to change the attitude of the people so that the people understand that there is a connection between the human waste and the risk factors that affect the public health interest of the people, and that they have a role to play. As we play, they have a role, and of course also empowering them, as opposed to being descriptive, that we would want to say you must have X, Y, Z. So we start with what people are able to afford, just for purposes of having the disposal from human contact, and then progressively grow that one and make it now into something that looks aesthetically okay. Right.
Yeah, and Andrew, Kefa is more emphasizing on the culture and the people, but do you agree with him first? And then number two, what would be more reasons for open defecation? Why should people opt for open defecation? Yeah.
Yes, no, I do agree with Dr. Ombacho on this sort of cultural practice. It's a long-standing cultural practice, and we need to address this problem by changing people's attitudes of mind about this practice, so that people realise for themselves that they're putting not only their own health at risk by continuing to practice open defecation, but that of their family, that of the neighbours in the community. So it's very important that we have an approach where we are communicating to the people about a need to change practices and to build for themselves. Even a basic toilet will prevent the transmission of many of the diseases that we've been discussing, such as diarrheas, including cholera, but also some of the other infections that are transmitted by human feces.
Right. And Andrew, just allow me to also ask you about, you are from UNICEF, and I know you have some programs that you do and research as well. Maybe what would you say is the impact of, we will be talking about the diseases that are as a result of open defecation, which is linked to poor sanitation. But now, what would you say is the impact of this open defecation regarding diseases? Are we seeing people dying from, the sanitation-related diseases? Where would you say we are as a country, the numbers of people dying from these transmission diseases as a result of poor sanitation or inadequate sanitation?
Indeed, the health impacts are really severe, and yes, as I think you're aware, Purity, the diarrhea for young children is a killer disease. Today, it's considered to be the second leading cause of death in children under 5 years of age. So that's a serious problem. It's estimated that approximately 9,000 children in Kenya die from diarrheal disease every year. Now, a proportion of those deaths are attributable to the lack of good sanitation in the country.
Right.
But as UNICEF, and particularly concerned with children's health, we're also very worried about the linkage between open defecation and malnutrition. So the repeated infection, diarrheal disease, but also worms, contributes to malnutrition in children. And one particular type of malnutrition, stunting, is a real cause of concern, because a child that is stunted doesn't grow to their potential height, but also their cognitive development, the development of the brain itself, can be impaired by stunting, which again can be traced back in part to the poor sanitation.
If I can add, what the colleague Andrew is talking about is that, generally speaking, the subject that we are engaging today about sanitation and safe water, it contributes to between 40 and 50% of the disease burden in this country, and of course, that's huge. And basically, if you looked at the numbers, it's huge. If you looked at the cost implication in terms of what we are pumping in, is huge. And yet, the basics in terms of minimizing the risks can actually be so self-gaining largely, because we can actually be able to save on the finances that we use. We will save on the time wasted, and by just manipulating simple risk factors. Yes.
And Kefa, just before we get to the diseases that are as a result of inadequate sanitation, maybe what's the linkage between open defecation and sanitation?
Sanitation is the big subject. The sanitation is a big subject, and within sanitation, there are quite a number of issues that we need to address. Open defecation is one of those huge contributors to either, if we do it well, it will be able to actually take us to a level where we are having sanitation levels very high. If it's poor, then that actually will contribute heavily to sanitation, the poor sanitation status of a country. For example, if people are not using toilets, it means, and of course in the rural setting, and maybe even their attitude and the knowledge on terms of how they handle their feces, it will just now be an issue of an individual to begin with, the first individual who has actually gone to open defecation as a person, the contact between him and the people in meeting in terms of greeting, the feces that are going to be either washed by the runover, the rain, or some insects. So it has got a very huge multiplying effect in terms of the effects in human.
Yeah.
Yes.
Be letting us understand safe ways for defecation. But just before that, maybe Kefa, I'll just take you back, please, if you do not mind. We are talking about open defecation, and he is telling us that 30%, only 30% of the population will be rendered to have maybe safe ways of defecation. So now just tell us once again, why is open defecation the biggest contributor to some of these inadequate sanitation problems or complications? Why is it? Is it because of the transmission, or do we have maybe, let's get more scientific, the feces and the transmission, maybe do we have more germs in the feces, or why are we having a big problem or main focus on open defecation?
I think I will just start it from where Andrew left it. I think the bigger fixer in this problem is actually safe management and disposal of human waste.
Yes.
That will be the big fixer. But you have asked a very wide question. What is the composition? What can we call sanitation?
Yeah.
There are quite a number. Waste management, both liquid and solid. There is hygiene. That is where you are managing the issues of the attitudes. There is the toilet access. There is the safe water. And there is also the issues of personal hygiene. And there are many. The list is big. But now, to be specific on the question that you've just asked, why are we zeroing down on open defecation, minimizing globally and in Kenya? It's because we know that the bulk of the risk factors in terms of microorganisms that are transmitted to human or even to animal actually are passed on from human feces and even animal feces. Of course, as we talk about human, we are also not forgetting that there should be adequate and proper disposal of even animal waste where it so happens. But interestingly, our body is carries quite a number of microorganisms, some which are just safely in the body, just lying there, and unless the numbers are disturbed or they have become higher, or the body mechanism is actually such is rendered to be weak, that's when they find time to be able to thrive and grow and maybe become a risk factor to an individual. And it is interesting to note that even the subject we are discussing, the most affected, just like he said, children and the aged, because of the issues of immunity.
Right.
Now, that is why we say that if we are able to control the disposal of human waste, and generally speaking, it means we are cutting the link. Now, once we can, there is the issue of disposal. But there is also the issue of self-managed disposal. So the self-managed is addressing the issues that you can also dispose it in, it can be a flush toilet, it can be a pit latrine, it can be a cut where you are just digging and actually covering. But if it is not safely disposed, if that act is not done safely, then it means still that would be it becomes another angle of exposure to the risk. So, if for example, if the service is meant to deny the flies, the smell, and of course also the disposal. So those are some of the issues that needs to be addressed holistically.
Dr. Andrew, just now let us understand some of the diseases that are caused by or as a result of poor sanitation. We can list just a number of them, and then we will be dealing with them one by one.
Okay, so one of the main groups of diseases that are of particular concern and are linked to the practice of open defecation are all of the diarrheal diseases that can be transmitted through contact with human feces. So for Kenya, I think one of the greatest concerns is cholera. And as you're aware, we've seen a series of outbreaks of cholera across the whole country in the last 2 or 3 years. And this can certainly be traced back to poor sanitation. So as Dr. Kefa was explaining, the feces can be transferred to food. It can also be transferred to drinking water. And that, allows the transmission. But there are other diseases that aren't quite so common now. So, for example, typhoid is also a diarrheal disease. And also virtually now eliminated from Kenya is polio, that is also transmitted through human feces.
You're right.
But there are also a number of worm infections. So Ascaris, for example, is transmitted through human feces. And children that have worms are suffering because of the impact it has on their ability to absorb the nutrients from the food. So they become malnourished. So those are just some of the many examples.
Yeah, and let's talk about them. Let's talk about typhoid, cholera, polio. Maybe, Kefa, just help us understand, because when we talk about cholera, someone may just say it's just a disease. But when we talk about someone suffering from cholera, how serious would that be?
What Andrew has just said is that, before I come to the cholera, is that there are quite a number of issues that the diseases. So we will wish to ramp them. Yes, just going into the details, but we will wish to ramp them that there are those which are water related and water associated.
Yeah.
And that's now when we are talking about the big subject matter of sanitation. But today we are discussing about open defecation, because you will be surprised that even trachoma would be having a connection into issues of poor sanitation, because they are quite huge. So we have the huge classification of related and associated. But let me come to cholera. Cholera is such a very, it is an indicator on the status of sanitation in any given place. And actually it tells you clearly how poorly the sanitation issues are managed in a place, because it means basically is that people are actually drinking or eating their own human feces. That's basically what it means. And it is not a very good measure in any given place, where if you have a repeated episodes of outbreaks of cholera, then it means I think something needs to be done differently. The water, the food, the attitude, all those things must be addressed. Now, safe to say that if that is happening, the other diarrheal diseases must be also in the play. And now, if we go into retrospective studies and get to understand what must be happening, you will find that there is quite a huge amount of other diseases which are related to that, because this is quick indicator, because cholera by nature, when it strikes and when it is actually now, it has taken the incubation period, you cannot hide it. You must be able to be seen to be diarrheal. You must be seen to be getting weak if nothing is not taking place. However, even as we talk about preventive, there are serious issues that needs to be addressed. Now, cholera, if there is no prompt access to medication in the hospital, that is in the worst scenario that you actually you are suffering from cholera. It is very fast that it must drain your body with the fluids and you must die. So, but this is a simple, manageable disease in terms of treatment, but most importantly, the issues of prevention, safe management of the human waste, the attitudes in terms of personal hygiene, that addresses the bigger issues on this, and it reduces the cumulative other side in terms of management when there is an outbreak, where we spend so much amount of money. And indeed, in the recent past in this country, we have, from 2014, we are actually seeing an emerging issue of cholera. That's not very good. Even counties that didn't have cholera, we are actually getting cholera cases reported. That is not very good. And yet, when we look at the progression in terms of disease management in this country, by 2004, I think most of in this country, cholera was an issue that maybe if you hear there is an outbreak of cholera, then it becomes a concern.
Yeah.
So if we address first, if we get our prioritized from even an individual administration and even management of wherever we are working, both national and county, and get our priorities right, we are likely to be able to save so much money, to be able to actually invest in different other places. Yes, and we make our people more healthy.
And when we come back, we continue with this discussion on some of the diseases that are caused by poor sanitation, but most importantly, we look at solutions and safe methods of defecation. That's when we come back. We take a breather, but the show continues shortly. Welcome back to the second and the last part of the show, the only opportunity you have to call us live and also ask a few questions. The number is 0791478990. Our topic of discussion is open defecation, to help us understand what are some of the solutions to this and what are the harmful effects of open defecation. In studio, I do have two special guests, Dr. Andrew Tivet, who is a water and sanitation expert, and Dr. Kefa Ombacho, who is also from the Ministry of Health, Public Health and Sanitation, to be specific. Welcome back to the second part of the show.
Thank you.
And you introduced the topic, the issue of diseases that are related to inadequate sanitation. Let's just from your own perspective, and also listing a few of them that you already had listed. How serious are these diarrheal diseases? How fatal are they? I mean, when for example, there's an outbreak of some of the diseases, we've already looked at cholera. Maybe we could now get to for children and also polio. When there's an outbreak of any diarrheal diseases for children or for the adults in any nation, what do we expect? Do we expect more deaths to be reported, or how serious are these diarrheal diseases?
Yeah, thank you, Purity. Indeed, these diseases are extremely serious, and from the perspective of children, because a young child, an infant, a toddler, has still a developing immune system, when they are struck by a diarrheal disease of some kind, they can become very ill very quickly, and indeed, in some cases, they will die because of a diarrheal disease that wouldn't necessarily kill an adult. And that's partly because the young child's immune system is not able to defend itself against these diseases. Dr. Kefa earlier was talking about cholera. Cholera can, if it's not treated quickly, kill even an adult with a strong immune system very quickly, within as little as 24 to 48 hours. So it is a killer disease, and anybody, an adult, or if you're a carer looking after a young child, when you start to see the first symptoms of diarrhea appear, it's important to take action. So we promote through the Ministry of Health and the health system the use, for example, of oral rehydration salts. So it's just a water with a little bit of salt and a little bit of sugar. And that can help to keep the body hydrated and prevent the diarrhea causing death in the case of cholera, for example.
Yeah. All right. And Kefa, just help us to go back to the misconceptions about open defecation, especially the issue of culture, because he will be helping us understand what exactly happens on the ground when they go and try to speak to people to avoid, to stop this, whether it's related. Let's get back to in Kenya, Kefa, you from the Ministry of Health. Just tell us what are some of the misconceptions about open defecation in the country right now? What do people say about it?
One thing, Purity, I would say that in this country, I think we have made tremendous progress, but we could have been better. But if we trace back from the 70s, 80s, where we were, we have done a tremendous well. But the myths in this country, as much as the free education and continuous efforts are being made in issues of health promotion, I think we have not been able to reach to what we would have wished to have. One is that we start from the very village level. There are some population which still think that feces from the young children is harmless. There are those who also believe that a toilet is not a facility that can be used in common in a village for those who build in a village for more. And there are also those who believe that in some cultures that a dog would be a very suitable cleaning material, especially for children. And there are those who also believe that since they are just maybe like colleagues who are nomads, they believe that since they are not going to stay in a place for quite a long time, they might not require. There are also those who believe that there is still bush. And I think basically those the knowledge gap, the pockets of individual community beliefs, the traditional passed on beliefs have been issues that are actually myths in our own thinking.
Yeah.
But we could also have the challenges. There are also challenges which are actually affecting why guys think that they should be able to do. And the challenges are now here we'll be having issues of the social status of some guys. Some guys also believe that they don't even require a toilet. There is the cost implication. And there is also the issues of ownership. There is the issues of a shared facility. So it becomes nobody's business to manage the facility.
Right.
And I think basically those are the main issues that we have been able to see. And also the appropriate technology that they are using. But in this country, we working with UNICEF, World Bank, we have already actually brought in private sector to be able to, one, to reduce the cost of the, if it is the pan, the toilet pan, which has now been reduced. Even the issues of weight, because sometimes back we were using the slab. The slab maybe will require 4 men, very strong men to lift. Now we have the plastic. And we have also made it to be to the private sector that there is business as we improve the sanitation status of the country. They have got also business to be able to do, so they are actually trying to reduce the cost of access so that as people progress from any simple toilet, the cost in terms of putting a toilet is manageable.
And Andrew, maybe when you try to go out to the villages and reach out to people to just stop open defecation, are these some of the challenges that you face, or what do people say?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. It's, as Dr. Kaff has described, it's not an easy matter to change a long-standing habit. So we have developed, along with other organisations, a process that we call community-led total sanitation. And working in partnership with the Ministry of Health and also with the county governments and their teams of public health officers and the community health volunteers, really the frontline workers, what we do is we go into a village and we call a community meeting. And so in that meeting, what we try to do is we try to trigger a change in people's mindset. So it's a practice that's, you know, habitual, open defecation, but by talking to the community members and showing them very graphically the linkage between human feces and how it can be linked to diseases, that helps to really trigger a change in mindset. So we call that step, in fact, of working in the community, the triggering process.
Right.
And from there, what we see is we start to see people in the communities thinking to themselves, perhaps, you know, it's not acceptable behaviour to practice open defecation. There's also, particularly for women, there's the issue of dignity and the lack of privacy of not having a toilet. So we use some of these messages to start people questioning in their own minds about the practice of open defecation. So our first step is to try to begin to change an attitude, and that then leads to people demanding for themselves a toilet. So what we see is households beginning to dig a pit latrine, for example, and that then is really a process that we see taken across the whole village, and our aim is to take that village to become declared as an open defecation-free village.
Right.
And that's something that's happening with great success in Kenya. We're seeing counties adopt this process called community-led total sanitation. In fact, I think it's being used now by all the counties in Kenya.
All right.
And so we're making good progress in Kenya.
All right. And just before, Kefa, you tell us some of the safe methods for defecation and also tell us the solutions, because 5 million people, it's not a small number, really. Let's just have a look at our home remedy segment, where it's just an emphasis on the impact of open defecation. Let's get straight to the safe ways of defecation. We've really seen the impact it has, and from this discussion, I really do not know whether there's anyone who wants really to practice open defecation. So what are some of the safe ways, Dr. Kefa, of defecation?
The safest way of defecation is to cut the linkage of the human waste. It should be disposed in either pit or a running piped drain. That's the safest. And of course, but it is a package. It comes as a package. And there are quite a number of issues that also you must be able to observe or do. So I said earlier that we have left the earlier thinking of a description. You must have 100 by 100, blah, blah, blah. No. So we in that triggering process that Andrew was talking about, we discuss about the connection of feces to human and the disease, and how important it is to the people who we are discussing with. So the first thing is to be able to get the human waste disposed either in a pit. It can also be, I'm only giving you quite a range. If you are not able to, and if it's taking you time, and if there is land, you can actually dig, and also if you have to do that. But that again becomes now open defecation. But in situations that you might not have the pit, it is better to dig and cover. Now, the next step is you must be able to wash your hands. I think that's the very basic issue, and that's why we are actually saying we are advocating for open defecation free. So people should not be able to defecate in the open. It should be, the feces should be disposed in some place where the human contact is denied. Yes.
All right. And now you mentioned that as a country we are at 5.1 million people using open defecation method. So where is the gap and what is the solution to this, Dr. Andrew?
Well, most of the population that practices open defecation are living in the rural areas. It's less of a problem. So more than 5.3 million practicing open defecation in the rural areas, and only about 300,000 people practice open defecation in the urban settings. So our approach, as I explained earlier, the community-led total sanitation approach, which has been adopted and endorsed by the Ministry of Health, and has been developed into a standard protocol, so that all of the public health officers and the community health workers can use the same method. Now, Kenya has set itself an ambitious target to become an open defecation-free nation by 2020. And I think that's really admirable of Kenya, and I think it's quite reasonable to be able to achieve that goal. But what I think we're going to need to see happen is increased investment by the county governments, their ministries of health, in what is essentially a preventive health measure. So sanitation prevents many of the diseases that we've been talking about as well. And also the second message that Dr. Kefa was emphasizing is very important, is we want to put barriers in place between diseases and people. So for sanitation, a critical barrier is the toilet. So even a basic pit latrine can be a safe toilet as long as it's kept clean and its flies are not allowed to go in and out of the toilet. The second barrier is the hand washing. So with those two barriers in place, we can prevent most of the diarrheal diseases and other infections that are transmitted by human feces.
All right, and yes.
We will go, just only to add one point is that the safe, we also actually advocate for the safe availability of water. We are complete. Now, to be able to bridge the gap in between, working with the other partners at the national level, we have been able to map the counties and the country requirements, how it is, the status, and we give these checklists on every end of the year to show them exactly where are they, what do they need, how can they do it differently, and how long will it take them? Now, I actually carried some samples for you right now. This is Mombasa, this is Machakos, this is Tana River. Each county specific, we have a scorecard, which we
have different, and maybe from your own survey, Dr. Kefa, maybe which county, because you said you've really done some research, which counties, which are the top counties that you would say as Minister of Health that they need help, they need more? Because he talked about investment as a challenge. So when you're advising the investors, which counties would you say that they should focus on? Is it the ones that you've come with, Machakos, Mombasa?
No. I think basically, as a person who's coming from the national, it would not be in my business to discuss about the county, but it is tabulated here. How each county is doing. The ones which are doing
Maybe
poorly, I'll leave it with you.
Okay.
The counties which are doing poorly are actually here, but we also don't leave them there. That's why we go, for example, if I pick at random, this is Machakos, for example, we actually ask, how much are they losing if they continue doing the business the way they are doing? For example, in the last, up to 2017, if they continue doing things how they were doing it, they will be losing 757 million shillings due to poor sanitation. Right. And of course, the tabulation is cutting across investment, sickness, and all those issues. We also show them the overall coverage, and we actually give them the level of preparedness for how, because again, we must also anticipate if they don't, then what is the level of preparedness? Because cholera is an indicator of feces actually in food or water. Then we also put it here so that quickly, because part of the business in the national government is to provide support in terms of building capacity. And we also look at the enabling an environment in Machakos, for example. Under this, we are looking at what are some of the new emerging issues in terms of legal, community preparedness, to be able to and the progress to deliver. Now, this, and we also talk about the stunting as to what is happening with the people, I mean the children, and also the county climate changes preparedness. So this we prepare, and this is normally given. Now, why we do this is that we wish to be part and parcel of what is happening, because the country envisages that there should be equity in service delivery, and especially even at this point in time when the Big Four, in one of the Big Four is health. And issues sanitation, if they are done well, we will be able to minimize and actually take care of a big chunk of the disease burden, and actually start looking at other issues that are emerging, especially like now the non-communicable diseases, which are actually also an issue which is emerging now.
And my director tells me it's 1 hour since we began this discussion, but Dr. Andrew, I'll just welcome you just tell us your parting shot, maybe what do you think ought to be done moving forward to just help us as a nation, as a Ministry of Health, and also do you think they are doing enough? What's your parting shot in regard to ensuring that the government really achieves the open free defecation come 2020?
Well, first of all, I think I'd like to commend the government of Kenya for taking this issue so seriously and for setting itself this ambitious target of becoming an open defecation-free country by 2020. I think already in place we have the policies, we have the protocol for the community-led total sanitation. On the Ministry of Health website, there is a real-time monitoring platform so that we can see the progress in every county, every sub-county. So I'm seeing that we're already building a great momentum in the country. But where we still need to make a greater effort is for the county ministries in particular, county ministries of health, to invest more in promoting good sanitation and moving people, what we say, up the sanitation ladder. So moving them from the very worst situation, which is open defecation, moving them up to have a basic, hygienic and safe toilet.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Trivet, water and sanitation expert from UNICEF. We thank you for coming. We highly appreciate. And Dr. Umbacho Kefa, thank you so much for coming and just helping us understand what the ministry is doing, because it's a real concern, and we wish you all the best in the mission of ensuring that the country is open defecation free come 2020.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And that's all the time we had for the show. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for keeping us company. Now you know what it means when you practice open defecation. You need to stop that. My name is Purity Musel.